Pradeep Surekha, past President ICC, Ms. Smita Bajoria, founder EduNet Foundation, Director of SK Bajoria Group, Dr. Rajiv Singh, DG ICC. Dear friends, always a pleasure to be back here and very good to see all of you. And I'm really very pleased today to have the opportunity of sharing my thoughts about VIKSIT Bharat 2047. Now, it's a particularly appropriate time to do so because I think we are all in the midst of or poised to make choices which I believe would accelerate our journey towards VIKSIT Bharat. Therefore, I think it's a very opportune time really to discuss exactly what we mean by VIKSIT Bharat, what is the pathway, what could be the obstacles, and really what are our realistic expectations of traversing that journey. Now, as I said, we are today really in the midst of a very important moment of choice. But we've also actually completed 10 years of very solid performance. And that foundation of 10 years and all the transformations that have taken place actually enables the country today to move up to a higher gear and embark on that journey towards VIKSIT Bharat. Now, what does VIKSIT Bharat, what does that journey really require us? I think first of all, it requires a vision for the nation. It requires an understanding of the world because in this day and age, we lived in a very globalized environment. We have a lot that we seek from the world. The world in turn, as we get bigger, has an increasing interest in our performance and in our thinking in many ways. And we need really strong leadership. We need strong leadership because the pathway to VIKSIT Bharat is actually very much a journey of reform, a journey of modernization, but a journey where we actually, to quote a phrase from the Prime Minister, where we balance both our traditions and technology. So this combination of vision, understanding and leadership, I think this is really in many ways the choice that we have to make, and clearly that choice cannot be made by looking towards a duty roster of multiple people who will come and go as they like in terms of the potential and future of this nation. So it's very, very important today that we are clear, we are decisive, and we are very supportive about the direction in which the nation is going, that we are very conscious of what we have achieved for the last 10 years, and we are very conscientious about what we want to do for the next 25. Now, different people have described this journey towards VIKSIT Bharat in different ways. One way, a very easy way, is actually to put some numbers on it. And the obvious number is a GDP number. We are today $3.8 trillion economy. I think the first immediate step, which we hope to achieve in the next few years itself, is to become a $5 trillion economy. That was a goal we had spelled out some years ago. And then really between the 5 trillion, I think the target is not actually whether, but when in that VIKSIT Bharat journey we actually reach a $30 trillion economy. A lot of studies actually are very confident we will do it certainly by 2047 or even earlier. And then I draw your attention to the fact that Goldman Sachs some months ago came up with a report which again equally confidently predicts that by 2070s we will actually be an economy which is $52.5 trillion, which at that point of time, according to Goldman Sachs, would put us second. But I'm very sure that we are not a nation who will be content to stay second. So that's a kind of a numerical description of what this journey would involve. But if one looks at it, what it actually takes is how do we address the challenges which we have inherited? How do we actually focus on what is much more contemporary? And actually, how do we prepare ourselves for the emerging era? Because if one looks today at the pace of change, the new domains that have come up, the new businesses that have come up, the new professions that have come up, how do we strengthen ourselves at home? How do we improve our ability to compete abroad? Because there's a correlation here. The stronger we are at home, the more effective we are abroad. But the more effective we are abroad, there's more that we can leverage in terms of resources, capital, technology, best practices that we can bring home to actually accelerate that journey towards VIKSIT Bharat. So this, in a sense, is the definition of the task before us. Now, before I come to what our thinking is on how to proceed, I want to give all of us a reality check, which is that in many ways, we still, even after 10 years of very solid foundation, we still actually have a few handicaps with which we embark on this journey. One of them, of course, is multiple decades of what you can call socialist ideas about the economy. And then when these ideas failed to deliver, created a crisis in the early 90s, reforms. But the reforms were really delayed. I mean, if one looks at some other countries who we could think of in a way as a peer group, if one looks, for example, at the reforms which China embarked on those reforms about 15 years before we did. Now, even when we embarked on those reforms, we still didn't pursue it as single-mindedly and with the kind of focus that we should have, particularly in the areas of manufacturing and of infrastructure. So, today, 3 decades after our era of reform started, we are actually doing what we should have probably done in those 3 decades, which is really create a modern, efficient infrastructure, create a manufacturing which needs that infrastructure to be competitive, create technologies which need manufacturing as a base for that technology to actually emerge. So these are really some of the realities we need to remind ourselves, because we need to address these even as we go forward. The second is actually also a mindset problem, but of a different kind, which is that socialist era, that kind of permit Raj, license Raj era. It actually also created a culture of hostility to growth. That the job creators were not given the respect, I would say the latitude, the kind of support that any economy at this stage of our growth should actually do. And it was strengthened by this hostility towards growth, strengthened actually by a culture of leakages, that we had a socio-economic distribution system which was initially designed to be inefficient. It was actually designed to leak, and it was that leak which was the basis of politics in many states. So we have today tried to overcome it. I will talk about that. But in many states, including, let me be honest, this one, that culture of hostility to growth, that aversion to respecting job creators, that I would say almost discouragement towards talent and skill expressing itself, I think that is still very much a burden that we carry. The third handicap we have is actually the shortcomings of governance. that in many ways we have equated poor governance with freedom. That when actually attempts have been made to improve the quality of governance, this is actually often opposed, saying that, somewhere it is a detraction from our democracy. Now, we need to be very clear. Democracy cannot be built on poor governance. The two are not at all compatible. If anything, they are antithetical. So, we have various versions of it. But if you look, what is common to all these versions is actually a kind of a vote bank principle. That to appease a vote bank, we are actually willing to not only tolerate but sometimes actually practice and encourage poor governance, because that is really what allows that vote bank politics to flourish. Now, that could be in terms of the security of our borders. It could be in terms of allowing something like Article 370 to play out as long as it did, even though the Constitution explicitly recognized it as a temporary provision. It could be about that indifference to the fact that many areas of this country were actually ungoverned in the name of, these were left-wing extremist areas. And actually the writ of the state till recently did not run in many of these areas. So this too was a handicap to our growth. And finally, of course, when you have all of this, the reality was that till a decade ago, very honestly, our own ambitions were very low. Today, we are defining the goal of VIKSIT Bharat. That itself is a big change, because in the past, we didn't do so. Our sights were much lower, our aspirations were much more modest. I think in many ways, we were almost fatalistically inclined to accept that there were limits to what we could do. That is what has changed. And it is that change, recognition of that change and the new hope that this has produced, that is really what will drive our journey towards VIKSIT Bharat. Now, how do we build VIKSIT Bharat? I think the first dimension is the very obvious dimension, which is the economic one. And again, as a shorthand, one looks at growth rate, because the growth rate really captures so many aspects of development, not all of it. And I would say today should be a source of great hope to all of us, that despite the COVID era, when much of the world has not recovered from it, much of the international economy is still struggling with the aftermath of the COVID, we have actually returned to a 7% growth rate, with the expectation actually that we will go much higher this year. Not just return to a high growth rate, but also many of the decisions we took during COVID were actually far-seeing, they were disciplined, they understood the importance of dealing with the crisis of that magnitude, but not in a way in which it would hobble us as we were on the recovery path. So one of the very important differences in the manner in which we dealt with the COVID and other countries dealt with the COVID was actually we still maintained our fiscal deficit discipline. So today when we say that inflation is under control, that growth is very robust, that we see investment confidence come back, I think a lot of it is the fact that we actually took a very, I would say, smart, deliberative approach to finding solutions during the COVID time. Now, while we speak of a 7% or higher growth rate, it's a combination of many factors which is really today driving reform. One of it is easier to do business. One of it is the ease of living. How do you bureaucratize a society? How do you lift the burden of bureaucracy, which in many ways is such a dampener on growth and creativity in this country? Then again, as I said, we have this deficit of infrastructure to make up. And what Gati Shakti has done by coordinating different aspects today of our infrastructure development and by using technology to actually realize the efficiencies within, we have actually transformed today the manner in which the infrastructure is being built in this country. For a nation which had a reputation of being a laggard, if not worse, in this respect, I think it is worth thinking about today that we are building 28 kilometers of highway every day, or that we are laying 14 kilometers of railway track every day, or that if one looks at the last 10 years, in the last 10 years we have built 75 airports, which is almost 7.5 airports a year. Or if one looks at the number of metros, every 2 years we actually build 3 metros. So I give you those really as indications or indices. And I do that in a city which is actually seeing the benefits today of a metro expansion, which is looking really at what the possibility of road building and infrastructure development can do. Now, while this in many ways is the hard infrastructure, I think we also have to ensure, and this is where the world outside has a very important bearing, that we give the requisite support to our businesses, to our labor, to our employment, so that they actually are protected or they have a level playing field in respect of unfair competition. Because that is also a real challenge to the growth of business in this country. The idea that other businesses from other countries which enjoy subsidies, which enjoy all sorts of production factor advantages, they come in with impunity into our economy without any reciprocal access, and they have a free run of our economy. I think today clarity in that respect and policy is designed to obviate the consequences of this kind of unfair access with unfair advantages. I think that too is part of the economic outlook which is required to build a VIKSIT Bharat. Now, when we speak about economic outlook, I would particularly stress the revival of manufacturing, because at the end of the day, there is a debate today, a very active debate. I think many of you would be aware. There is a school of thought that we are actually not capable of manufacturing, that we have missed the bus forever. The government doesn't agree. The government believes that previous governments may have missed the bus, but we have boarded that bus. We have every intention of driving that bus. That today, with a range of supportive policies, including the production-linked incentives, we are very convinced today, and that if our infrastructure is modern and competitive, if there are friendly business policies, if environmental clearances are not used to block business as it used to be done in the past, we are very convinced today that actually manufacturing can grow in this country. And we need that because a lot of countries, especially in the aftermath of COVID, see short supply chains actually as essential to national security. During COVID, not just us, the entire world woke up to the fact that supply chains eventually led to one very over-concentrated geography in the world. And if something happened to that geography, which it did during COVID, actually the entire global economy was at risk. So when we today talk about manufacturing, when we talk about supply chains, we are not talking economics anymore. We are actually talking national security. So how do we revive manufacturing? And that is why this constant emphasis that we are putting on Make in India. Not just Make in India. I think it's important in this forum that I also urge business that you procure from India, because I do understand that often people look with a very strong focus on relative competition. But I can tell you that if we are really to build this economy, it's important that businesses themselves take the lead of fostering a supply chain which is much more domestic. That businesses need to take Make in India as seriously as today government is taking it. So this can only happen, the revival of manufacturing can only happen if government and business actually come together as a partnership. Now, the moment they do that, you can actually see, things start to change. For decades, we were an importer of defense equipment. In the last 5 years, actually last 10 years, the moment we start pushing defense, make in India, that same country, the same economy, the same businesses which earlier felt that they couldn't compete with the world have suddenly begun to do so. That we are seeing today, make in India is actually producing defense exports. We are looking actually at our overall exports today. At $770 billion, they are actually at a record level. So there are countries struggling to go back to the pre-COVID levels of exports. We are one of the few who have actually forged ahead. Now there's a very good reason for it, and the good reason frankly is a very good government. So I urge you to reflect on that, because VIKSIT Bharat is not just the responsibility of the government. It's for the government to lay out the vision, as I said, to provide the leadership, to undertake the necessary reforms, but the stakeholders have to travel down that path, and that stakeholders is very much actually includes, as I said, the job creators, the wealth creators, the employers of this country. Now, when I speak about rising to the challenge, I can actually give you multiple examples where, if you reflect on it, we have surprised ourselves. When the COVID came, quite apart from the fact that we, at that point of time, even on something as basic as masks, we were importing it. Can you imagine that a country of this size, a $4 trillion economy, was not even making its own masks? But from masks and PPEs and ventilators, all that we did, the real takeaway from COVID was actually the fact that we, one, ended up demonstrating that we were one of the most efficient vaccine producers in the world. And two, that we actually had an invent in India vaccine as well. Now, we began the COVID as a country of concern. The rest of the world worried, how is India going to be, going to handle COVID? We ended the COVID actually as a country which gave 100 countries vaccines and 150 countries medicines of various kinds. So look at, what we actually are capable of. I'll give you a very different example. Look at telecom, and don't look at it at telecom purely as a service which all of us do. Look at telecom also with the national security aspect of it, the fact that all of us, as we say, we sometimes tell our phones what we don't even tell our own spouses. So our phones know so much about us. And yet, what were we doing? We were importing 4G from China. We were importing 2G, 3G from China and Europe. When we decided to put our minds to 5G, lo and behold, actually, this India is completely capable of producing its own 5G stack. So the 5G today that you have on your phones, for the first time, actually is an India stack. And you have to ask yourself, if you could do 5G, why couldn't you have done it earlier? Now, I can go on and on. It could be, I gave you the example of defense. I gave you the example, look at space. Look at, a domain like drones, that are something on which we were relatively a late starter. But today, across the country, if you actually look at the proliferation year after year, with very little thought, both about the injury it causes to the soil and actually the cost that it has for the national economy. Now that same country which is doing this for decades is suddenly discovering the virtues of nano fertilizer. So I'm giving you these as examples that when we actually put our minds to it, we are perfectly capable of coming up with different solutions, with great achievements, doing things which compare with what is happening in the rest of the world and which sometimes can be even faster. A model case is actually UPI. I mean, if you look at the manner in which we have embraced today cashless payments, our embrace is achieved in the last 10 years. And I think that should be very much a motivator of what we can do in the years ahead. Now, of course, when we talk about economy, we talk about all these policies, finally it does come down to good governance. And good governance has a number of definitions. It's a world into itself. But I think if there's a common thread today in everything that we are doing, it is actually the use of digital tools today to improve governance. That if one looks at the scale of what we are doing and the transparency of what we're doing and the efficiency of what we're doing, actually again, it's a remarkable transition in the last 10 years. That we today, without leakage, have the ability to give rations every month to 81 crore people. It's a staggering feat. If one looks at pretty much any social scheme today of the government, and I know some schemes like Ayushman Bharat haven't come to this state for reasons which the state knows best, but those which have come, I mean, as I said, the scale of it, because the targeting of it has become so efficient. Something as complicated as giving houses. Giving houses has a history in this country which goes back to before I joined the government, which is a long time ago. We used to do it in a village, 10 houses. Somebody once told me actually it was a problem in the old days, because if you are in the political world, they give you a limited number of houses and said, please give these decide where these houses are to go. But the numbers were so small that the people who didn't get the houses far outnumbered those who did. So you got no gratitude for the action at the end of the day. Today, actually, we have, in the last 10 years under Awas Yojana, we have done 40 million houses, 4 crore houses. Now, 4 crore houses with an average family size in India of 4.8 means about 190 million people have got houses which they did not have before Narendra Modi became Prime Minister. 190 million people is like actually housing. 190 million people is like housing all of Germany and Japan at the same time. Even something which all of you hear every day, Ujjwala. I mean, many of us gave up our gas cylinders in response to the appeal. Today, Ujjwala, the beneficiaries of Ujjwala are 110 million people. And remember, there are 110 million kitchens out there. So again, do the multiplication and see the impact that this has. Now, why are we able to do it? We are able to do it today because we are applying efficient instruments. Those instruments existed. There was no commitment to apply it. In many cases, there were vested interests, which there still are in many states, which block the efficient application of good governance tools. So I mentioned that to you because if one takes the total impact today of better governance, in the last 10 years, 250 million people have come out of poverty, which in our history is the largest which has happened in any decade. So this is the journey that we need to continue, because it's the expanded middle class, it's people coming out of poverty, pushing up, who in turn will push the next segment higher. This is really what VIKSIT Bharat is about. But all these are the problems that we inherited, or which is around us today in the contemporary world. I think if you are planning for 2047, it is also important that we plan for the sunrise industries, for the technologies of tomorrow, for what could be the other revolutions if we have ridden the digital revolution so successfully, and if it has helped us to address so many problems, there are many other possibilities out there. And it is important we are aware of it, we prepare for it. And preparation sometimes can have very multiple facets. And I think if one looks at it, clearly we are heading for a world of AI and semiconductors, of electric vehicles and battery storage, of green and clean technologies, of drones and space, or possible seabed resource extraction. So there are actually physically new domains out there which are going to impact our economy. There are going to be ways of doing business which will, if we marvel today at ChatGPT, I mean, this is a baby step compared to actually what awaits us. And that what awaits us is, we are not talking decades here. We are actually talking a few years. I mean, in this term, at the end of this term which will be coming, the world and the economy and the potential and prospects will be looking very, very different. So how do we actually prepare for that? And that is where, human resources, educational reforms, which is why something like the new national education policy is so important. Much more seamless infrastructure, because the efficiencies finally of the economy is still very much dependent on it. That we really have to look at radical improvements in rail, ports, air, roads. We have to look at new forms of employment itself. That, there are limits obviously to how much governments can employ. There could also obviously be time taken for non-governmental employment to expand. So how do we actually focus on self-employment? How do we support self-employment? It is not something which was done recently, not done till recently. That if one looks actually both conceptually and scale-wise at schemes like Mudra loans, that again, just think of in Calcutta alone, 25 lakh Mudra loans have been given out. So, nationally, we are actually probably talking close to about 500 million. So, if one looks today at Mudra, one looks at the Swanidhi for the informal sector, how do we actually find ways by which small business, personal, the informal sector, people who otherwise in the rigid orthodox structure would not even be eligible for any loans, how do we today provide them with the resources to carry on with the business, expand it, employ others? I think these today are some elements of how we need to think bigger if we are to think for tomorrow. So finally, let me come to my own immediate direct domain, which is foreign policy. And you would ask, so in all of this, what does foreign policy do? And as I said, foreign policy's first responsibility is actually to see how we can get the resources, the technologies, the best practices from the world. Because there are countries, if one looks at a Japan or a Korea or ASEAN countries, many of them grew fast because their foreign policy single-mindedly went out there at the world and said, what is it we can bring back home? And what is it we can do actually to make our national economics much more efficient? The second is connectivity. Because partly for the historically the colonial period, which broke our natural connectivity, it was aggravated by the partition, which created problems at both ends of India. So how do we today rebuild connectivity? Because there is interest in the world. Once you become the fifth largest economy, when people know you will be the third largest economy soon, the world also understands whether it's production here or consumption here, any which way, they want the partnership between different regions of the world and India to be much more effective than it is. And one big obstacle today is actually efficient logistics. So if you look today, I would really say connectivity initiatives have very, very high importance in our foreign policy. And it's no accident that in the middle of all their preoccupations in the G20, actually the leaders of India, Europe, Saudi Arabia, UAE, US took time out to agree on a connectivity initiative called IMEC. Now, I'm giving you that as one example. There are others. Yesterday, my colleague Sarbananda Sonovalji actually signed a long-term agreement in Chabahar port. That's another very important connectivity corridor, because the international north-south transport corridor can take us from Iran into Central Asia, separately Caucasus, Russia, and then into Europe. East of us, something should be of great interest to this city. If one looks at the India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway, and I accept right now the conditions in Myanmar are a challenge, but that highway actually has the ability to connect Kolkata to the Pacific coast of Vietnam. So if these projects actually are realized, do think of it, look at the map of the world and see where these connectivity passages lead. We will have connectivity to the east all the way to the Pacific. We will have connectivity to the west, IMEC, which actually takes you to the Atlantic. We will have connectivity through the international north-south transport corridor, which takes us to the Baltic and the North Sea. So the role that foreign policy can play today, because these are long-term enterprises, they are not going to happen in a year, sometimes not even in a decade. But in many cases, the work has begun. So how do we take this forward? I would say that's a very important contribution foreign policy can make. The third is really in the alignments and the comfort levels, because increasingly, in this data-centric world, business is no longer just business. Countries are very picky about where their data goes, who has access to it, who harnesses it, who deploys it. So there is now, in a way, a different set of filters which will increasingly come into business. So you will have concept today like trusted vendors, Already in telecom, it is something which people give a lot of importance to. In the semiconductor world today, if you look at the efforts today being made to diversify and increase the production of semiconductors, it is seen as very central to de-risking the global economy. Because if one looks today at the importance of chips, chips pretty much determine everything in a modern economy. So how do we today get into those value chains? How do we get into semiconductor production? Who are the partners? Who do we work with? Who will work with us? I think that too is something which foreign policy can help determine. Then if one aims still higher, and this is certainly there in the promise that the BJP has made to the country for our next term, we actually have set our sights on becoming a global hub for design, for innovation, for engineering. We will actively woo global companies, multinational companies to bring, because there is one great advantage we have not used it well in the past, which is our skills and our talent, our demographics. That again, some of you would have seen a news report 2 or 3 days ago that there are more Indian students in the last year in Germany than there are from China. This was not the case before. Now, why is this happening? No, I would hold that clapping, because it's a very double-edged statistic, because eventually those people should be here in India. They should be here in India if I actually am in a position to get that kind of global business to come to India. So today we are actually seeing in a digital data-centric world, a technology-driven world, the importance of talent and skill. There's a great deal of interest in mobility, that people want. Mobility is good, but mobility should not be one-sided. We also need to see mobility on the other side, businesses coming into this country. We want eventually to work from India. We want to work for India, for the world, but we want to work from India. And work from India needs to be a parallel facet of Make in India. And finally, we have to accept that this is a globalized world. There are already about 18, 19 million Indians, almost 2 crore Indians, who live, work and study abroad. This is a reality. It's good for us. It's good for us in a variety of ways. Now, this number is going to grow, partly because of the nature of the economy, partly because of the likely evolution of global demographics. So one very important responsibility of foreign policy is actually going to be how to secure Indians abroad. So what you referred to, Smita ji, saying, the operations we did in Ukraine, we cannot, and in fact, we are not taking these as one-off challenges. We need to have a system, because given the magnitude of our human resources spread across the world, we need to have a system which is prepared at short notice to take care of every Indian going out of our shores who may be in trouble of some kind. And that, I tell people, when we speak about Modi ki guarantee, that is actually Modi ki guarantee outside our borders. And it is a guarantee that we have actually already delivered. So, in this journey towards VIKSIT Bharat, we know where we want to go, we know how we want to go. We believe that we have the vision, the experience, the courage to reform, the ability to deliver it on the ground, a 10-year record. These kinds of journeys, they don't have a silver bullet. But the next best thing is actually pressing the right button on the right day. So please do that. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'd be very happy to respond to anything you may have to say.
Honorable Minister, thank you. I think it's always a pleasure to hear you. And listening to you, the final thought which I had was welcome to New India, which is confident, fearless, assertive, full of pride, and Atmanirbhar, but globally engaged. And you are a reflection of the aspirations of 140 crores Indians when we look at the world and how India engages with them. Thank you for your wonderful address. With your permission, we would like to take some questions. I think maybe the first one can be from the dais itself. Mrs. Bajoria can start. Yes, working.
Thank you for a very enlightening talk. It's very engaging. My question is that India is engaging its best practices for the neighborhood nations, Pakistan, China, and Burma and all. But however, there is a lot of hostility around. There is a China factor possibly that is playing out. How does India plan to deal with these hostilities all around us?
You use the word hostility. I would very dispassionately use the word competitiveness. I think the world is competitive. Every country competes with other countries. Some countries compete more. Some countries compete a little more fairly. Some countries compete less fairly. these are the realities of life. Now we have to plan and we have to act keeping that in mind. So when it comes to our neighborhood, I would assume that in many ways we have a natural advantage, an advantage of geography, of culture in many respects, of logistics, of shorter distances, of proximity. But we also, because neighbors, every country's neighbors also have problems among them. There will be that side of the ledger as well. And we have to learn how to, anticipate what could be competitive moves. We have to be very strategically aware of it. So if I were to give you an example, let us take something like Sri Lanka. When Sri Lanka went into the kind of deep crisis that it did a year and a half ago, to me it made eminent strategic sense that we actually responded very strongly at a time when the rest of the world was actually unclear about what they were willing to do. Now contrast this with how it was 15 years ago. 15 years ago actually things were happening in Sri Lanka. Hambantota port was decided in 2008. At that time the thinking in this country was that we should have no problem with it. So, if you don't have the understanding of the world, you don't have the awareness, or if there is some kind of ideology blinkers that you have, or some vested interest at play, then your calculations are going to go wrong. So, I think it's very important to have that grounded sense, to be guided by national interest, to in ourselves build up that spirit of competitiveness. And if we do that, I'm very confident that in our neighborhood, because I look at another neighbor very close by here, Bangladesh. When I contrast what the relationship in Bangladesh was before 10 years, and I look at it now, the kind of people who used to operate from there, who actually directly impacted the security of our Northeast, there's a sea change today. Today, our goods are going from our country to Chattogram and Mongla ports. If you look at the pre-65 links, which were all cut off, the rail links, the road links, they've all been built today. Today our trains are going, our trucks are going, the waterways are operating, there is power connection, there's a fuel pipeline. Now that's really what good neighborliness is about.
How do you see Russia emerging in the next decade due to the sanctions and the ongoing war? What sort of an impact will that have had on India and the rest of the world?
There are three aspects of Russia that we need to consider. One, from an Indian point of view, we have always had a positive relationship with Russia. And at the end of the day, if I were to evaluate any country, I should have the confidence to do it out of my own experience, rather than to listen to somebody else's experience and somebody else's agenda. So my historical experience with Russia has been positive, number one. Number two, if one looks at, my business, geopolitics in a way, look at the map of the world. You see this big Eurasian landmass, okay. There are three big countries out there, us, China, Russia. It makes sense that, here in this, this is like a geopolitics 101, that your neighbor's neighbor is your friend. So there's a very strong strategic convergence out there, which, whose logic is undeniable. And the third is actually an economic factor, which is, I know there were certain trigger factors for this particular trend. But the fact is, Russia is one of the biggest natural resources producers in the world. Given India's economic requirements, we are talking, you say VIKSIT Bharat. What does VIKSIT Bharat mean? VIKSIT Bharat means we are saying at least for 25 years, probably much longer. For 25 years, this country is going to grow at between 7, 8, 9%. Think of the resources that will be required to support this. Think of the relationships which will provide those resources. And I put it to you that in that, Russia comes very, very high. So if I were to make, I put that experience issue aside, forget that I am from the foreign policy world. If I were to make a purely economic or business decision, I'd say there's a very strong case to have that relationship with Russia, because it's not, people look at oil. Yes, oil is very important. It's not just oil, It's oil, it's coking coal, it's metals of various kinds, it's fertilizers. So there are a range of products, and the more complex our economy becomes, I think in many ways, many of those resources out of Russia will become very important.
Mics. Pritish.
Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for this opportunity to interact with you. My name is Pritish Chaudhary and I represent Titagarh Rail Systems Limited. So you'll be happy to know that enabled by the Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat policies, we are the only Indian private sector entity, sir, that has the ability to design and manufacture metro coaches and passenger trains such as Vande Bharat, sir. So please let me convey my admiration to you and the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji for the great work that you've done in re-establishing and repositioning India in the global order, sir. And not just that, but igniting a strong sense of pride, of responsibility, and as you said, ambition in the youth of India, such as myself. So you spoke a lot about creating jobs through manufacturing and through the engineering sector, and my question pertains to that. So today we see a lot of MNCs come into India and create large design setups and engineering setups, employing 7, 8, 10,000 people. But the manufacturing jobs that come with those, which are actually much more manpower intensive, are kept abroad. So could you share some of your views on how there exists a potential to create almost 7 to 10 jobs, low skill but manpower intensive jobs with every engineering job that is created, sir? Could you share some of your views, please, on how we can bring and keep some of these manpower intensive jobs within the country?
Sure.
Thank you.
Look, there's no sweeping cross-domain, cross-business solution. Come, please. Here's the problem in a way. The fact that MNCs are bringing design centers, research centers, etc. Would you rather have them or not have them? Because if you say it is conditional on many other things, you may not have them. Okay. Perhaps part of the answer is with us, that if our business culture builds up, if our economic energies are stronger, then a particular line of business, let us say your line of business, if your global competitors today are designing many things, if your line of business is very strong, the ability for them to migrate internally is that much stronger. Because we have seen what happens, when you cut yourself off. After all, when I began by saying we had a handicap, what in a way was the error? The error, number one, was to, become non-competitive by actually snapping those links and becoming very autarkical. And number two, by putting total focus on distribution with no attention to production. And that distributional politics, as I said, it was actually consciously a politics of poverty. That, it was designed to keep us backward so that the politics of the day would flourish. But that's a different matter. So I think it's very important today that we remain connected with the world. That, after all, we have seen the benefits of that. That I can see a time when, your coaches, if they are not already doing so, actually go out. So, I have I went to Mozambique last maybe 2 years ago, and Mozambique, Maputo city, actually has a suburban system, which is a small version of, let us say, what there is in Mumbai or Chennai or what. Now, they were very keen because they had looked at what was happening in our country. The president of Mozambique happened to have studied in India, and we ended up actually with a contract for that. So I ended up having a ride on Indian rolling stock in Maputo. Now, to me, look, the idea that our carriages go out. I mean, we are constructing a metro today in this country. Anybody who goes to Mauritius should take pride in the metro that we have built there. So I do believe, I mean, just look at the length of the metro that we have done today. And I remember when the first metro project was being debated. This was during Atalji's government, NDA 1. I was in Japan at that time. It was done with a Japanese yen loan. There were people who said, why do we need this metro? We've lived fine without it. At that time, the only metro was that limited section that you had in this city. Now, when one looked at that, and if people were satisfied with that, and now you look at the reality of actually what is happening, and there's a world of a difference out there. So, I would say the answer, of course, see, look, we are going to press global business. If you want access to the Indian market, you want to be competitive, you want to be eligible, we will push for Make in India. I mean, that is a very fundamental commitment of the Modi government. And in different sectors, we are going to, really make that in many ways a kind of a critical principle. But as I said, part of the answer is also grow your business and attract those guys to come to you.
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Sharma?
Sir, namaskar. My name is Prashant. I run healthcare sector. We have hospitals here. So my question is pertaining to the dollar. We have seen it going from 8 rupees to above 80 rupees. And what is your take on it? How do you see it going in the next few years?
I thought only I remember that 8 rupee era. Look, it's actually a very interesting, there's a lot of interesting things happening in the currency world. I mean, you brought up the dollar. Actually, the most interesting currency right now is the yen. Because, and don't take it otherwise, it's nothing to do with my Japan connections. If you look at the fluctuation in the yen, it's been very, very noticeable. What is actually happening again in terms of the international economy is a lot of countries are finding it, for a variety of reasons, difficult to use dollar for their trade settlement. Some have issues like sanctions, etc. But a lot of countries actually have a physical, they just don't have the dollars. So we have started now moving towards using rupees the bilateral currency as a way of settling. My own sense is one of the changes, we speak about how there was a bipolar world, US and Soviet Union, then it became unipolar US. Now we say, okay, it's moving towards multipolar, there'll be 10, 12, 15 countries who will count. I think to some degree this kind of spread is also happening in the currency world, that there are going to be, some of it could come out of technology, solutions. I mean, our very definition of a currency is in some ways under challenge. But I can see that that kind of very high focus on dollar, which used to be there before, maybe that would dilute. Now, I wouldn't go to the other extreme. I mean, I hear people speak of things like de-dollarization, etc. I think that is very, very exaggerated. The dollar is still the dollar.
Sure. Mr. Roy?
My name is Rupen Roy. I am a past president of this chamber. Sir, my question is that one of our largest trading partners is China. And we have this 1962 experience And therefore, how do we balance the two issues of Hindi chini bhai bhai to Hindi chini bye bye, B-U-Y, B-U-Y?
You know, we had a 1962 experience. Useful to remind ourselves of it because some people are in denial. But it wasn't just 1962. After 62, 1988, Rajiv Gandhi went to China. In many ways, that was the key step towards normalizing our ties. And then there was a very clear understanding that we will discuss our boundary differences, but that we will maintain peace and tranquility on the border. And the rest of the relationship will carry on. From 1988, that has been the basis for the evolution of our ties. There have been issues, I mean, I'm not disputing that. What changed now is what happened in 2020. In 2020, the Chinese, in violation of multiple agreements, brought large number of forces to our border, and they did it at a time when we were under COVID lockdown in this country. Presumably, that may have had some bearing on somebody's calculation. Now, we responded by counter-deploying our forces, and then all of you are familiar with the story. We had the clash in Galwan, and for 4 years now, we are both deployed, ahead of our normal base positions, normal patrolling zones out there. So it's a very abnormal deployment today along the line of actual control. Now, given this tension between the two countries, it's not a matter of we had a conflict 62 years ago. It is what is happening today on the border. As Indian citizens, none of us can or should disregard actually the security of our country, the state of our borders. So we cannot carry on with the rest of life saying, that's not our concern. That is our concern. It's our country. It's our line of actual control. So it is today a challenge. Now there is an economic challenge, and that economic challenge was exactly what I spoke about. Our neglect of manufacturing and infrastructure in previous years. That why is today Indian business buying so much from China? I mean, partly you can say, their manufacturing scale, their infrastructure efficiencies, there's the nature, the subsidies that they give, the nature of their economy, that gives them an advantage. But I urge you all to think about it. Is it really good for the future of the country? Is it good for your own business to be dependent on some other source, which could leverage it at some point of time for some non-business related reason? So there is today a big economic security debate underway in the world, not just in India. It's happening in Europe, it's happening in the United States. That countries feel today that many core businesses must stay within the country. That supply chain should be shorter. If you don't make everything, at least supply chain should be reliable. It should be, this concept of what is called friendshoring. At least it should be with some country which will not mix business and politics. Someone with whom you don't have a boundary dispute. So I think this is a dilemma, but the answer to this dilemma is not entirely in the hands of the government. A large part of it is decisions which business has to make. And what the government would do is, we will definitely in different sectors, because you can't do everything at one time, but certainly in sensitive sectors, we will be very, very careful, who does what and where do we source from and who is eligible for what. I think that is a national security obligation that we have, and this government is very, very clear and conscientious about its national security obligations.
Absolutely. Mr. Imasinka, just at the back.
Hi sir, my name is Devrat Himatsinka. I'm a fund manager and wanted to ask you about I'm involved with EduNet in a small way, Just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. You know, when we read the ASER paper that came out, I was shocked.
What paper?
The ASER research paper, the ASER report, ASER. So,
Okay.
so you know, we ended up reading that even though a lot of kids had access to education in the country, it was a shocking number that about 75% of class 4 kids did not have access to math. And you know, that's what kind of led me to get involved with EduNet. And wanted to ask your opinion on how we can change this, because if we have to move forward as a country, I think the first thing that we need to do is, you know, improve the roots and improve the education systems in the country. And even today, if we see, you know, India has renowned universities like the IITs and IIMs, but people still give more preference to the Ivy Leagues for some reason. So how do we get at par with that, sir?
Sure. You know, it's interesting. I mean, first of all, I'm not an educationist, but I give you a common sense response. I heard you say, the first thing we need to do is this. Somebody could be standing and saying, the first thing I need to do is to get piped water in my house. First thing I need to do is to get an electricity connection in my house. First thing I need to do is to have a house. First thing I need to do is to have a road to my house. First thing I need to do is to get my rations without people pilfering it or siphoning it. There are many first things we need to do in this country, and definitely education is among them. So the challenge for us is, unless we move on multiple fronts, you know, when we speak today about different government schemes, you know, because the government leads the way. I mean, we are still at an income level where these things, the key responsibility is with the government. Starting from portion, nutrition, actually starting from prenatal care, all the way till pensions. So prenatal to pension, actually today the Modi government has some intervention at some point, and most of these interventions actually have become scaled up interventions. And the idea is really, because eventually it goes down to what are called sustainable development goals, which is a very holistic sense. You know, there are 17 goals. You know, how do you actually address each one of these, which we are trying to do through different campaigns and exercises. Now, where education is concerned, absolutely. I mean, we have both a quantitative issue and a qualitative issue. Now, a lot of it is happening. You know, I saw a number which said that, I mean, I know anecdotally you spoke about IITs being a premier institute. Now, the fact is, after that initial set of IITs, for many, many years, the IITs didn't decrease. You know, there were a few. And you know, I mean, this is a state where the earliest IIT came here to this state. One of the earliest IIMs came to this state. And yet, what should have happened, which is, if something worked well, what would be the natural response? That institution which worked well, now you should have 10 of it. When you are 10, you should have 100 of it. But that scaling up never happened. Because for various reasons, people had no ambition. They didn't have an interest really in the progress of the country. So today, actually, how do we both scale up education, and by the way, not along with education, I take both skills education go as a combination. And how do we continuously improve the quality? Now, I was reading that there was actually a figure that in the last decade, in this country, 7,000 new colleges have opened up. Now, quantitatively, I think it's a very, very impressive figure. Now, I know in many cases, if one looks, you know, number of IITs, number of IIMs, number of AIMs, number of triple ITs, all of these have grown. But when so many institutions come up, it also is a challenge that how do you ensure the quality, how do you ensure that you don't, you know, that you continually keep that up. Now, my experience anecdotally has been, you know, I've seen private institutions, for example, some of them hugely impressive. I've seen government institutions, new ones. You know, when I look at it, I couldn't have imagined when I was studying that anything like this would ever exist in our country. So we are capable of a lot of it. But you need a government, you need a society which is continuously pressing the pedal and wanting, you know, we need to be ambitious and hungry and wanting to continuously reform every aspect of our existence. So if the alternative is that, you know, I'm happy where I am, don't touch me, I'm insecure with your, I don't like this program, I will not let you do that, then I think it's a different kind of future. I mean, that vision of future actually looks to me like the vision of the past.
Thank you.
Let me remind ladies in the room that it's no more a men's world. I think you should also be asking some questions. Mr. Saria has one, but after him, I think maybe we can take one question from some of the ladies. Yeah, one or two. Yeah, Smita Chatterjee is one, and yeah.
Honorable Minister, sir,
Preeti.
you have given foreign policy a new dimension, new element, and a new thinking. And it's not only in the country, but I believe all over the world, globally now, people are talking about India's foreign policy. I'm sure in a couple of years it will be called, it will be termed as a Shankara policy or something like that in the later parts of the world. Sir, I come from a small town, Dibrugarh in Assam, and I chair the Indian Chamber of Commerce for Northeast. Sir, even I try to be humble. ICC has made a lot of contributions because our focus has not been on subsidy, but on connectivity and on infrastructure since big day. And Bangladesh connection, I mean, after 1996, when Sheikh Hasina ji became Prime Minister, and later on in 2009, when she got re-elected, we were invited and we made a presentation to her. And what you mentioned recently, just a little while back, Chittagong, Mongla Port, riverways, and various other aspects were part of our presentation in 2009, which has happened, which has been happening. But in last 1 decade, it has really taken a shape. So, you mentioned last couple of days, you have mentioned about Northeast and also about China. We are very much concerned about Northeast, and when we talk about VIKSIT Bharat, Northeast is an important part of VIKSIT Bharat. You mentioned about Myanmar, Thailand, Myanmar, India, this highway. We will be very happy to learn that we had organized in ICC, BIMSEC, this thing, where Bangladesh came forward and announced that they would be like to become a part of it, to make it, extend it right up to Bangladesh and then to Calcutta. So it serves one of the purposes which we are talking about. When we talk about Northeast development, sir, connectivity, Myanmar becomes a very important part. After Bangladesh, we worked on Myanmar and we were very successful. Myanmar becomes a very important part because of the connectivity, because of this thing. In particular, Manipur is also a part of, Myanmar becomes a part of solution to Manipur. Not much has been done on Myanmar, where a lot of focus is required so that our Northeast development takes place. Kaladhan project could not take up. So what would you think, sir? How do we proceed further so that the connectivity becomes much better? Thank you.
Well, let me just make 2 quick points here. One, I think the Modi government very much recognizes the strategic importance of the Northeast and also the obligation that we have as a country to the development of the Northeast. In fact, every minister of the Modi government has visited the Northeast at least once. In fact, most of us have done it multiple times. If you look at the number of times Prime Minister Modi has gone, probably he's done more Northeast visit than all his predecessors combined. So the kind of attention and support that the Northeast is getting today is really unprecedented. It's also been very much a focus of foreign policy. You know, one part of it is how Bangladesh improvements in our ties with Bangladesh has helped the Northeast. The other part, Myanmar, I will come to. But it's one very interesting innovation there is it's one region for which we have a dedicated forum with Japan. There is something called Act East Forum with Japan set up in 2017, where we actually agree with the Japanese on yen-funded projects. And these projects today have contributed to road connectivity within the Northeast, between the Northeast and the bordering countries. They actually are funding today the sewage and water supply in Guwahati. They will be funding the cancer super specialty hospital, which will be coming up in Mizoram. So it's actually a case where we have got foreign resources to actually focus on the development of a particular state. And I think when a state really cooperates with the center, there are a lot of benefits which can come to the state. I think there's a general lesson here for a lot of people. Now, regarding Kaladan, look, the Sitwe port is ready. It's been ready for some time. Our problem with Kaladan has been building the road. The road goes from Myanmar, from Mizoram down to Sitwe. And the reason for it is very simple, that there is a conflict going on in Myanmar. That until something, the conflict is resolved, unless there is peace. We've actually had work teams which have been kidnapped, who are working on that project. So the expectation, it's not that Kaladan failed to take off. I mean, Kaladan in many ways has become a victim of civil disturbance and conflict in Myanmar. And that's something which is really beyond our control.
Sure. Preeti? Yeah.
Good evening, sir. My name is Preeti and I'm one of the directors at Edunate Foundation. Sir, our foundation collects the laptops, used laptops, refurbishes them, re-engineers them and further distributes it to underprivileged children. Sir, I have seen you talk about digitization of India and various forums, and also in your book you have mentioned it on several occasions, like the book Why Bharat Matters. So I just want to understand how can we better align VIKSIT Bharat strategy of digital India with our cause?
You know, I can only share with you my own experience, brief experience in the political world. All of us as members of parliament, we have a fund with which we support developmental activities. I'm a member of parliament from Gujarat. And the particular district that I focus on is a aspirational district with a large tribal population. It's called Narmada district in Gujarat. That's where the Statue of Unity is. Now, when we speak about what can we do, and particularly when you brought up laptops and digital, today out there, from my funds, for example, I support what the concept of a smart Anganwadi. That you can actually have children who are able to start, whose educational entry is faster with a digital medium than it would be if they did it manually. They start life so early. And in fact, in that region, because there is a lot of development work which is going on, but we were very keen that the employment benefits of it go, a lot of it, to the locals. So how do you actually, digitally skill people who have done just a few years of schooling? And the fact is, once you start, it's a very interesting thing if one looks at any digital device, people who may struggle with orthodox literacy actually have a facility to deal with it. So for us, because we have a leapfrogging challenge here, that how do we massively raise the skill of such a vast section of our population? I think we are a natural candidate for this very strong embrace of digital education. And the kind of effort that you're making, I think is very laudable. I can see variants of it actually in different states and cities and districts that I travel to, and I'm very confident that our and it's something each one of you would see in your own particular environment, that how quickly people actually have mastered any kind of digital communication. I mean, I cited UPI numbers as one example of it, that today a street vendor would use a UPI payment. And for someone coming from Europe or US or even other parts of Asia, it's a source of wonder.
Smita, there is Smita Chatterjee. Can we get the mic there?
Jai Hind, sir. I am Smita Chatterjee, Group CEO of Centrex Technologies, and I work primarily in the area of women and child safety through a product called the Whistleblower. And I am also the Vice Chair of Indian Women's Network, West Bengal chapter. So very recently in an interview, I heard that you said that we are at an inflection point as regards the youth of the country. I want to know your views as regards the women of the country. Are we at an inflection point?
It's a kind of a yes and no, because if one looks really again at the last 10 years, I still remember August 2014, when Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao started, when there was a public mention about the need for toilets, when things which we never spoke about in public discourse, something like sanitary pads, real requirements, but which for a variety of reasons people didn't talk about it. Now, there's a long way to go, but there's also a substantial way we have come. I mean, again, 10 years in certain areas is a small period to judge very deep change. But if you look at gender ratio figures, you can see particularly in certain states which were of extreme concern, you can see improvements out there. There's been a very conscious effort at actually promoting, role models as a way actually of not only enthusing women, but actually making men understand, what the possibility and the potential of what women can do. So I do believe at the end of the day, we are fighting years, generations really of entrenched thinking, prejudice, call it what you are. But I do believe as part of the many changes, I was, to the gentleman ahead, I said there are many firsts that we need to do. You could have easily asked me, and in a way I think that's what you meant. First of all, we need to sort out this issue. And I would agree with you that I think this too is something which we need to look at. So if you are to talk VIKSIT Bharat, there are probably 1 million areas we need to progress, and you need a government and a leader who has that ability to think through it all, who will have all those programs which will have their impact in different ways, which will be self-supporting. Because, often the recipient or the observer, people see one program making one impact. When you actually have the privilege of discussing or formulating or participating in these changes, each dot is actually connected to many, many other dots, and there is a whole front out there which is actually moving forward. I was at some place where we were discussing the piped water, the Jal Jeevan Mission, the fact that people don't have to go and collect water. Now look at the correlation. there's a direct correlation between providing piped water to people's houses and improving girls' literacy in that village. Because when there is no water, it is typically the girl child who's sent out to go and collect the water. So, you can think of it as a water project. It's also an education impact. It's also a gender issue. So it's by the way very much a health issue. Because the moment you get piped water, immediately the quality of your health goes up. So every one of these, each one has multiple facets, they all reinforce each other. They need to kind of move forward as in a kind of interconnected way. And we need that, I would say almost like an obsession. This country needs to push that over 25 years if we are to get to VIKSIT Bharat.
I know there are many hands. There are at least 10-15 people who want to ask, and I would like you to forgive me because I have a note with me. We have to end this session. But on your behalf, I can make a request to our minister that in the month of July, we would like to have you as our EAM back again in Calcutta. So
I think that request should be made to somebody else.
But we are in a way hopeful, and we would very much like that to happen. So I have no words to thank you. I think session with you is actually a treat, pleasure, and people want it to go on. There is so much to learn. Only thing I would say that whatever you said, these are not only words, because everybody, people in this room, outside this room, villages, people have experienced it, and people feel the impact on their lives. So with these words, I think I can only request this full hall to please give a standing ovation to our Honorable Minister for all the great work which he is doing. There are some mementos. I will request Mrs. Bajoria to kindly present a small token to our guest. It's a refurbished laptop on behalf of EduNet.